Hey there and welcome back to another MCU video. And recently we saw the debut of the latest installment in both the MCU and Antman franchises with the release of Antman and the Wasp, Quantumania. And yeah, recently I've not been all that high on the MCU. Just hasn't been all that exciting for me recently, but I did have high hopes for Antman, as the first two films were some of my favourites in the MCU so far. They were far more comedic in nature, and silly and weird, really embracing the wackiness of the characters involved in the story. After all, these films revolve around a hero who shrinks and flies around on ants. If they took themselves too seriously, it would come across as a bit ridiculous and kind of pretentious. And so they really leaned into the humour, and as a result, I find them very fun and compelling. Something different from your standard superhero fare. And I think, for the most part, that's what the world at large thought as well, because the first two films did pretty well at the box office, both grossing over $500 million each, and they also did decently well from a critical and audience perspective too. The first film has an 83 and 85% critical and audience approval rating respectively, with an average score of 6.9, whilst the second has an 87 and 80 with an average score of 7. Not too shabby, all things considered. And so, despite the MCU feeling a little bit bloated and in need of a fresh coat of paint, I was optimistic that this film would be quite decent. They were setting up for the next big arc of the franchise, Kang. They had to hit a home run, and so that's kind of what I was expecting. But then we come to the reviews, and they were not that favourable. Critics really did not like this thing. In fact, I'd say they hated this thing. It has a 47% critical approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. And I mean, that's the MCU's lowest, isn't it? I think it's the same score as Eternals, which is the lowest. And yeah, I did not like the Eternals much. It was kind of boring and it dragged on. And so this got me nervous for Ant-Man. Especially since, just like this film, the Eternals also had a much higher audience score, 77%, whilst Quantumania has a score of 84% currently. So I was worried that I'd have a difference of opinion to the fanboys and not like this movie. And so in the end I just had to go and see it, and I wouldn't call it bad by any means. It's decent. It's not perfect, and it does drag, and it can be a bit cringy at times. But beyond that, I can't help but think that the poor critical scores are a little bit unfair. And I kind of speculate that there might be a bit of pushback by people who have Marvel fatigue. They're judging the film a lot more harshly than they would have if it had come out in, say, 2017 or 2018. It might not be a strong film, but I don't think it's Marvel's worst either. And yet that's what I'm seeing a lot of. But at the same time, it is one of Marvel's weaker films. And it really shows that they need to go back to the drawing board to forge a new direction for the franchise. The formula is getting tired by this stage. If they want the franchise to keep going strong and keep up public appeal, it needs to continue to evolve. And I don't think this film does that. It doesn't evolve, and it should have, because it really is the first entry point to the Kang saga. I mean, yeah, there was Loki, but this is our first true look at Kang the Conqueror, the big villain that we're building to. And so this should have been the point where they tried something new. But yeah, it didn't happen. And like I said, I don't think that this makes the film bad or anything like that. And I'm honestly quite shocked at the poor critical reception. Because like I said, there's a lot to enjoy. As usual, I felt visually the film was a stunner. I know Marvel CGI has been a bit spotty of late, with all that talk about how they underpay and overwork their visual effects artists, but here I felt like the visuals really shined, and honestly, I feel like they were probably the best part of the film, which is a shame because I kind of prefer it when the narrative's the strongest element of a film, but you know, it is what it is. On top of that, the score itself, it's nothing special. Good soundtrack, not like it was bad or anything, just it kind of faded into the background, you don't notice it much. So no theme really stood out to me. And then the last of the tertiary elements that really stood out to me would be the action, the actual combat, the choreography. It was very good, especially the final clash with Kang, where he just stomps Ant-Man into the dirt over and over, before Wasp appears to help take him out. Very well choreographed. And of course this brings us to the story now. The film follows our hero, Scott and Hope, in the aftermath of Endgame. Hope's utilised PIM technology to make the world a better place, and Scott's authored a best-selling memoir talking about his adventures, and his daughter's become a bit of a delinquent. Oh, and she's also a super genius, because I guess everybody in the MCU is a super genius at this point in the story, eh? Oh well. Anyway, the whole Ant family gets sucked down into the quantum realm and encounter Kang. Shenanigans occur, and in the end, they end up seemingly killing Kang and escaping back to their universe. That's the bare-bones summary. And when it's put like that, I think the story itself is decent. It's good. But that's the overarching story. But it's the screenplay, that's where things fall apart. For the most part, the storyline for Scott and Cassie, when they split off from the other characters, it's good. They have some cool interactions with Kang, who's really interesting and intriguing, and who's played to perfection. They have interesting and exciting adventures, but at the same time, they leave way too much on the table. A lot of their early drama was that in Cassie's eyes, Scott had become complacent. He was always looking out for himself and his family and not the world. And so she was setting out to prove that they need to stand up for the proverbial little guy. But after that initial clash at the start and midway point of the film, they don't really come back to that. Instead, it becomes more as Scott tries to save Cassie from Kang's storyline. And yes, she has her revolutionary moment, but I don't think Scott really learns from it. And you know, the original story, it is fine, but it's just generic. Because in the end, you could have had this interesting clash of morals. One where Scott only wants to look out for his family, and yet she wants to help the rebellion against Kang. Perhaps give them the option to leave beforehand, but she chooses to stay back, and thus, he has to come to terms with what it means to be a hero again. He has to realize that he can't just think about himself. And I think that would have been 100% more compelling. But at the same time, it's not like this arc was bad. You know what was a bad arc? Wasp's arc. Wait, what arc, you might ask? Exactly, what arc? Wasp is a title character, and she felt like the fourth most important character behind Scott, which is fair, it's Antman, Cassie, and also her mum. The fourth most important person behind them. Come on. Speaking of which, the Pym/Van Dyne family go on a side quest where they meet up with Janet's former friend with benefits, which is like, okay, I did not need that side plot. And then they pretty much instantly kill him, and then they turn up to fight Kang. Their storyline was bloated, and it was boring. And it added very little to the overall film and narrative flow. And on top of that, it feels like they flanderized Hank into the ant guy. Completely and utterly, that's all he was. He was such a key and important character in the first two films, with a lot of trauma, a lot of angst, grumpy, and yet funny. And yet here, he felt like the least important lead of all, only there for comic relief, and kept talking about his ants. And then on top of all of that, the humor in the screenplay. It was tired, it was worn out. And they kept repeating jokes over and over, like the Darren/MODOK thing. You know, funny at first. But then you do the reveal to every single character, and it becomes less funny every time. Same with the ant quips. You know, it's funny the first time, funny the second time, less funny the sixth time. And it's a shame because it makes the film actively worse. Whilst the actual serious elements, Kang, Scott trying to protect his daughter, that's what's compelling in the script. That's what should have been the core of the film. Not everything needs to be edgy and serious and vicious, but I feel like more of that is what the film ultimately needed. It needed to be a bit more serious, because this is the introduction of the big bad. And thus, whilst it wasn't bad, it can't really ascend to the heights the MCU's done in the past. And that's a shame, because this was meant to be a reset. And so I understand why people don't like it. But at the same time, I still thought it was good enough. A 60%er. And so, yeah, that's probably all I have to say about the film. And so we'll call it here, and I'll just remind you that these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of the film if you've seen it? Do you like it, hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.